Despite recently losing his title due to unfortunate circumstances, Charles Oliveira is undoubtedly the best lightweight in the world today. But if you're a newer fan to the sport, you might not know how difficult Oliveira's climb was to championship gold. So for this video, we'll be highlighting the journey of Oliveira's ascension to the top of the sport. This is the rise of Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira was born on October 17, 1989 in São Paulo, Brazil. As a young child who grew up in poverty, Oliveira developed a passion for soccer early on and dreamed of one day becoming a professional player. Unfortunately, starting at the age of 7, Oliveira began suffering from abnormal heart murmurs. On top of that, he was also diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, a condition which severely affected his ankles. As a result, Oliveira was left hospitalized for 2 years and was even told by doctors that he could eventually become paraplegic. Luckily, with the support of family and friends, Oliveira received the necessary treatment and eventually made a full recovery. At the age of 12, Oliveira was introduced to jiu-jitsu and began participating in tournaments shortly after. After several years of competing, he shifted his focus to MMA and entered the sport of professional mixed martial arts as a top prospect back in 2008. The standout Brazilian would go on to accumulate a perfect 12-0 record before joining the UFC in 2010 at the age of 21. In his octagon debut, Oliveira immediately grabbed the notice of fans with a quick submission victory over Darren Elkins. Following back-to-back wins in the world's leading MMA promotion, Oliveira would have a very mixed bag of results in the octagon. Over the next 7 years, Bronx would pick up some quality wins over the likes of Jeremy Stephens, Nick Lentz, and Miles Jury, with most of his victories coming by way of submission. But Oliveira couldn't quite reach that next level. When challenged against top-tier opponents, Oliveira suffered losses to stars such as Jim Miller, Cowboy Cerrone, Cub Swanson, Frankie Edgar, Max Holloway, Anthony Pettis, Ricardo Lamas, and Paul Felder. Not only was Oliveira losing these fights, but in most cases he was either submitted or TKO'd. And while Oliveira was known for his ground game and he was showing improvement, something wasn't fully clicking and he was getting dominated by the upper echelon of fighters. After losing to Paul Felder in 2017, Oliveira was still only 27 years old, but had already competed 17 times in the UFC, with an octagon record of 10, 8, and 1. And while Oliveira always showed a ton of potential, most fans thought he'd never get over that hump and into the title picture. Before his next fight, Oliveira left the Macaco Gold Team to join Shootbox Diego Lima in São Paulo, Brazil. Oliveira already had a world-class Brazilian jiu-jitsu game, and he'd keep Jorge Patino as his jiu-jitsu coach. But a change in gyms would give him a better chance to become a well-rounded competitor, especially in the striking department. The beginning of Oliveira's resurgence started when he accepted a late-notice fight against Clay Guida at UFC 225. Bronx would submit the veteran Guida with a guillotine choke in the very first round, along with winning performance of the night honors. He'd follow up a few months later by sinking in a second-round rear naked choke against Christos Giagos, not only earning performance of the night again, but this time actually breaking Royce Gracie's record for most submission wins in the promotion. Oliveira had quietly ranked up 11 submission victories in his 8-year UFC run, and fans were finally starting to take notice. With a renewed confidence and more balanced approach to MMA, Oliveira avenged a previous submission loss to Jim Miller by defeating him in a rematch with a rear naked choke in the opening round. This win over Miller earned Oliveira his 7th performance of the night honors. Oliveira would extend his submission and bonus records with his next victory over David Tamer, a fight where Oliveira showed a new level of striking, nailing Tamer with a vicious elbow before locking on an anaconda choke. This win would lead to Oliveira signing a new 5-fight deal with the UFC, where he would continue his incredible resurgence. The first fight on his new deal put Oliveira across the cage from Nick Lentz once again, this time in a trilogy to finally settle their score. While Oliveira racked up some TKO wins before entering the UFC, he'd score his first TKO victory in the octagon against Lentz, landing a barrage of punches to wrap up their trilogy. Now having won his last 5 fights in a row, Oliveira wanted to keep the momentum going and took a short-notice matchup against Jared Gordon. This time, Oliveira would score a clean knockout on Gordon, the first true KO of his UFC career. It was clear at this point that Oliveira's striking had significantly improved, and he was finally breaking out as a potential contender. Up next for Oliveira was a showdown with Kevin Lee, a former interim title challenger that was close at times to beating Tony Ferguson for the belt. This matchup was huge for Oliveira, as defeating Lee would answer a lot of questions fans had about where he stood in the division. Lee was known to have very solid wrestling, great cardio, and respectable striking. So when Oliveira submitted Lee with a 3rd-round guillotine choke, it was clear that he was entering a different league. The win would also extend his streak of finishing opponents to 7 in a row, which tied Cowboy Cerrone for another UFC record. Oliveira would get the biggest matchup of his career up to that point against the aforementioned Tony Ferguson, who was coming off a loss to Justin Gaethje after winning his previous 12 fights. With a win, Ferguson could get back to challenging for a world title, having technically never lost his interim championship. But Oliveira knew he could slide into that spot if he could defeat Ferguson. Not only would Oliveira win, he'd completely dominate El Cucuy, almost breaking his arm early in the fight, and displaying an evolved stand-up game en route to a unanimous decision victory. Around this time, Khabib Nurmagomedov would vacate his lightweight championship and retire from the sport after beating Justin Gaethje. In response, the UFC had Charles Oliveira face off against Michael Chandler for the vacant lightweight title. Chandler was riding the momentum of a legendary career outside of the octagon as a 3-time Bellator champion and made a massive splash in his UFC debut, defeating Dan Hooker via TKO, right before the second showdown between Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor. Chandler came out hot against Oliveira, dropping Du Bronx with some vicious punches in the first round. Oliveira would survive the round, but things definitely weren't looking good for him early on. Everyone expected Oliveira to change his game plan and bring Chandler to the ground in round 2, but Oliveira did the exact opposite, walking down Chandler at the very beginning of the round and swarming him with punches to earn a second round TKO, along with becoming the undisputed UFC lightweight champion. It took him 28 bouts in the UFC, but Charles Oliveira had finally become lightweight king. As we've all heard as fight fans, it's one thing to win the title, it's another thing to defend it. In December of 2021, Oliveira was set to defend his belt for the first time against Dustin Poirier, who was fresh off back-to-back wins over Conor McGregor. Similarly to his fight against Chandler, Oliveira was dropped early by Poirier, but he once again overcame adversity by cinching in a rear-naked choke to retain his title. The victory over Poirier earned Oliveira his 12th Performance of the Night bonus, securing yet another UFC record. Up next for Oliveira was a title defense against Justin Gaethje, another matchup that put Oliveira against a heavy-handed striker with great wrestling skills. Unfortunately, just one day prior to the bout, Oliveira weighed in at 155.5 pounds, a half a pound over the limit. Because he was unable to make championship weight, Oliveira was forced to vacate his lightweight title, leaving only Justin Gaethje eligible to win the gold. While he entered UFC 274 as just a contender, Oliveira showed the heart of a champion, walking through Gaethje to earn a first-round submission after getting rocked multiple times. Oliveira may not be the official champion right now, but he's proven time and time again to be the best lightweight in the world, and has established himself as the UFC's most dangerous finisher. Charles Oliveira is an example of a fighter that overcame adversity and never gave up on reaching his goals. He currently holds the records for most post-fight bonuses in UFC history with 18, most submission wins in UFC history with 16, and most finishes in UFC history with 19. Still only 32 years old at the time of this video, the scary thing is that Oliveira could very well just now be entering his prime. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.